All right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're super excited to be talking about PC and console gaming in 2023. Why we're extra excited this time is we've been digging into this, what we consider one of our core, if not the core topic at Newzoo for the last couple months. And we've dug really deep into this across all of our products and teams to really compile what we think is a really exciting outlook and insights into this PC and console space. And I'll talk more about at the end. We also have a free report that a lot of this presentation is built off of, and it has a lot of cool insights as well. So again, thank you for joining, and let's jump in. So for today's presentation, we will be splitting it off into two parts. The first part will be a presentation by myself for 30 minutes. And at the very end, we will follow up with questions for about 5 minutes. There is a feature within Microsoft Teams here. You should see a button called Q&A at the top. So if you have any questions, anything you'd like to know more about, feel free to drop that in there throughout the whole presentation, and we'll try to get to as many as we can at the end. And if we can't get to that, we'll definitely follow up afterwards. Quick intro on myself. My name is Tyler. Very nice to meet everyone. So I've been in the games industry over a decade now, and I've done a lot of different roles, from business development to working at companies like 2K Games, working as a producer on NBA 2K, started my own studios before, and now I'm really excited to be at Newzoo for the last couple of years as the head of product. Yeah, it's a really exciting time for us as we continue to build up our product portfolio that really enabled us to share what we're hopefully going to share with you today and that you'll find enlightening. So a quick intro, the PC and console market in 2023. We've seen some very interesting last couple of years, and what does that mean? Before looking forward, I think it's good to look back. 2022, maybe people have seen from us or from others, this is the first time actually in over a decade that we've seen a downturn, or a bit of decline in terms of both engagement and revenues in the PC and console market. Now, because we're looking at this more holistically as analysts, what we found that this is actually more so a correction towards pre-COVID engagement and not so much a actual downturn or any kind of thing that we should be worried about. And if you actually look at the numbers, which we will quite soon, is that there's actually, compared to pre-COVID numbers, everything is actually up. So this is just a bit of a correction, and we predict that there's still going to be the continual growth in 2023 and beyond. So that being said, of course, what's been going on in the industry for a long time is there's been a big battle for attention, retention, and monetization. As competition grows, we've seen that there's been some really interesting developments in this front. As everyone, all the big companies, all the different size companies are all trying to figure out, how do I actually reach an audience? How do I keep them? How do I monetize them? So we're seeing some, of course, some very interesting trends that are growing, not new, but are growing in really interesting ways. And I think fueled by this new opportunity and challenge, including things you've heard, metaverse, transmedia, cross-platform, et cetera, et cetera. So hopefully we can dive into that a little bit as we explore this new year and see what's to come. So as I mentioned, I'm really excited because at Newzoo, we've been working on for over a decade now a unique portfolio of products, especially targeted towards the PC and console market. And with kind of three core pillar products that we have here, we're going to be able to take really, I think, three unique angles to provide hopefully a holistic view of the overall market landscape of the last year and how that impacts 2023 and beyond. So the first step of that and how the presentation will go is we're going to first look at how do we know the market more. This is coming from what we call our games market reports and forecasts, probably what we're most famous for, really breaking down from the top down. What are the big numbers, the big trends that we need to know to understand the market? The second step will be knowing the games more. So this is another product of ours, our game performance monitor, taking real telemetry, tracking data of what players are buying, spending, playing, viewing, et cetera, on a game, genre, et cetera level to really understand what's the market look like on a game level. And the last piece of the puzzle is knowing the gamers. So this is coming from our global gamer study, and we're going to be diving into more about psychographics, demographics, what makes up the PC and console player base. So starting off, we're going to go into the knowing the games market again. Top down, what's the big picture? So perhaps a lot of people have seen these types of charts from us before, but this is specifically focusing on PC and console global games market revenue for 2022. So this is specifically consumer spend. And the overall number that we saw last year was $92.3 billion across PC and console. That's 50% of the global market. The other half of that, of course, being mostly the mobile space. If we break that down even further, we can look at PC versus console here on the chart. We have console is making over 50%, 56% of the revenues, with 40% on kind of downloaded box PC games. And still a small chunk of that is the browser PC games, which are shrinking year over year as they convert more to mobile play. To note is quite interesting that PC overall had a slight increase year over year in terms of total revenue at 1.8%, and we had a more of a decline on the console space with 4.2%. But I'll give more context on that and why it's not so, again, it's not so gloomy here. It's actually quite an interesting picture if we zoom out a bit more. If we break down this last year's revenues per market or region, we can see some pretty interesting trends as well. We see there's a pretty big split between North America and Asia Pacific, both above 30%, Europe not far behind at 26%, and some of the newer regions that are growing were the few that actually did grow last year, which are Latin America and Middle East and Africa. Very small growth, but interesting that they're still growing even in these in a tougher market. Interesting also, I think, is Asia Pacific, very little decrease year over year. The biggest hit was North America. Always interesting to point out is US and China actually made up 48% of the total PC and console consumer spend. So again, like I was saying, taking a little bit of a step back, this is looking at 2015 to 2022. And you can see some really interesting trends here. We had a big console growth really kicking off from 2018 to 2020. We see very similar 2021, not far behind growth, definitely on the PC side, less on the console. But we see, again, that little bit of decline in the 2022 numbers. And this is obviously, again, like I mentioned before, post-COVID effects. And we've seen that across multiple variables. We have from the highest level, we have, of course, player behavior is changing. Engagement, which we'll look deeper into in a minute, is the most impacted one. Interesting enough, is more impacted than the overall revenues. But players, of course, are having more activities back in their life as they go back into the world again. But we've also seen impact around everything from hardware supply, which has impacted the new consoles, of course, and then, of course, game delays. This has been a big impact on 2022. But interesting enough, both the supply and the game delays, for example, is actually going to have an interesting delayed effect, a positive effect on 2023 as those games launch and as supply chains clear up. So looking back on our own predictions a bit, the solid line here is our current forecasting versus the pre-pandemic forecasting. And I think it's interesting to note, even though this was not the trajectory that we predicted a more steady growth before COVID happened, we still see that there's an overall overperformance across these 3 years than we expected. And that's, again, what I'm alluding to with that there was a huge overall impact and growth in the market, and we're just seeing a bit of a correction right now. All right, jumping into the next piece, we're going to go deeper into the game stuff. Genres, games, what does this actually mean? What do we see in the last year, and how might we see the year coming forward? So as I mentioned before, engagement was one of the most impacted here. This is a breakdown of average hours played per player in the year. And the light blue there is 2021, dark blue is 2022. And from these brackets, we can see the playing behavior has shifted a great deal from the very, very hardcore above 1,000 hours per year players, which had a 37% drop off year over year. And a lot of that has shifted into the more mid to casual range below 500 hours. So that's where we've seen a lot of the impact in terms of player engagement. But still, overall, the engagement, I believe the total number is in the double digits in terms of decrease year over year. But still, it's mostly heavily impacted by the very, very hardcore players perhaps getting involved in other activities in their lives. On a game level, interesting. This is a breakdown we cover in our products across PC, Xbox, PlayStation, and Switch data. This is US only, but we're looking at the top 10 games by their average MAU in 2022. I think interesting to note, obviously highlighted here is Fortnite, still dominating number one on both Xbox and PlayStation, number two in Switch, number three on PC. So top three across every major platform here. And you'll see a lot of other familiar franchises from Call of Duty to NBA 2K, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of similarities across the PC, Xbox, PlayStation forefront, except for exclusives like God of War. But Switch obviously is standing out as the most unique in terms of very heavily first-party titles there. Most of them are first-party here, as you can see. And the top-performing third-party ones tend to be a lot of the free-to-play, or also it seems we might say more games appealing to a younger demographic, from Fortnite to Fall Guys to Minecraft, for example. So very interesting platform, as we all know, and even the top ranking games should reflect that. Diving a bit deeper into the PC side, I thought was really interesting. This is the top 20 games again for across all 37 markets that we cover. And this is a breakdown again of average MAU, and we can see the top 20, we had only one title that was launched in 2022, the new Call of Duty, Modern Warfare 2. Half the titles were launched in 2015 or earlier, and three of these titles were actually launched before 2010. So in terms of engagement, the older titles are still dominating if they've really found their niche in games as a service or specialty, in terms of like The Sims, for example, here really standing out, where no one's been able to dethrone them from this very special niche that is quite large as well. Also interesting to note, of course, with PC is the diversity in platform coverage here. So these are all the platforms that these titles are available for. Half of them are not available in Steam. A lot of first-party titles or titles across Epic Game Store, for example. And I think that's quite unique to see the diversity, at least at the top 20 here we're looking at. Steam, of course, doing quite well in the mid to longer tail of the market, but it's quite an interesting, diverse platform market here. So, but looking into 2022 and actually the top releases, this is a breakdown of US only, the top 10 game, or sorry, the top game per month based on their first 3 months of revenue. And I think it's a pretty cool, interesting list of games. In terms of the magnitude and revenue, of course, this is also quite diverse. We have the August to November spread here of these top titles. Very long-standing franchises, very powerfully performing here. By far the largest in terms of gross revenue in the first 3 months. But I think it's also quite interesting to see the different pockets here. We have Elden Ring really stood out in February, performing really well in these months. And even in the summer months, which are much slower, you had some interesting new standouts, especially with Stray, the one indie title I would say within this group that really stood out, and quite interesting to see that it performed the best for any July release. Taking a little bit of a step back, actually. We actually track a ton of different layers of this data, like genres and subgenres, et cetera, and breaking down the yearly player share. So this is the number of percent of players that have actually played a game in X genre, like 83% of players played an adventure game. You see shooter and battle royale also over 70%, sports at 60, and then we see a bit of a drop off, but a lot of other titles. I really like, because we're talking about engagement as well, is a really key indicator, right? In terms of what are players actually playing? What are they spending their time? And if we look at the playtime share, this is the breakdown of all the playtime over the year. What genres are people actually playing? And we see 37% of all playtime is in shooter and battle royale games. So over a third of playtime is in these shooter-based games. And I think an interesting drop-off is actually the fighting, platform, and racing, which is only 3% altogether. A pretty large player share, but it's quite interesting that it kind of reflects that there's probably players that are trying these games out, but they're not sticking. And the 1%ers here, like the very small chunk, are probably the hardcore devotees of this specific genre. So it's really interesting, I think, to take player share, playtime, taking different angles to really understand what players are engaging with. If we jump into the revenue section, so in terms of spending, this is a breakdown here of the PC revenue by category versus the console revenue. So on the left we have PC, the right console. This is over the whole last year, and we can see what is the breakdown of premium or full game purchases, which is the dark green there. Both of them are over 50%, but we see console still the most, still more on the premium side with over 60% there. Very similar breakdown of microtransactions, about 30% each. So this includes any sort of in-game purchases besides DLC for us. Could be battle passes, virtual currency, skins, etc. And the other category I think it's interesting here is that DLC is about double on PC versus console. We have 13% versus 7% of all revenues. And that small sliver at the end is subscriptions, not Game Pass subscription, but this is in-game subscription. World of Warcraft, or even some of these titles now like Fortnite Crew, they have new features in there that actually have a new subscription model. And that's a small part at the end. In terms of premium versus in-game breakdown, so we actually have some very similar, I think, titles that we saw in some of these other slides. But I think it's super interesting to note some of these titles are doing really well and combining premium plus microtransactions or some kind of in-game revenue model. As you can see, Call of Duty's, the NBA 2Ks, for example, yearly franchises hitting the top of the premium charts, but at the same time really performing well enough in-game to be in the top in-game revenue charts as well. So I think this is a really interesting breakdown of showing how powerful that mixed monetization model can be. Yeah. Diving into some of those topics we talked about. So we talked about at the very beginning, highlighted, okay, there's metaverse, there's transmedia, etc. We dove into a little bit of what that actually means on a practical level for games. So taking a couple examples, which we thought were really interesting. Of course, Last of Us has been a hit TV show, but what does that mean in terms of revenue and MAU? Here we have a breakdown of those two categories. For revenue, this is just US, UK. For MAU, this is 37 different countries or markets. Quite interesting how big of a bump it's had across the board. The newer title of Last of Us Part 1 in 2022, obviously the most heavily impacted as the newer title. But I think quite interesting, especially on the MAU side, you can see how much it's actually had an uplift on even older titles across all the way back to the Last of Us 2013 version. So this is a really interesting one piece of the puzzle. I think a lot of the publishers and IP holders are using to re-engage players into their IP, even when there's not a new game available per se, with longer and longer development cycles. Another cool example, well, two examples here, I should say. We have The Witcher there with a huge 265% MAU growth month over month from November to December 2022. They've done a lot for a free next-gen update. Also interesting to know, of course, transmedia play with own TV series. So really a combo effect of different strategies coming together to really keep players engaged, re-engage with their IP. And I thought the Uncharted one here was also quite interesting. This is a breakdown, also a multi strategy of different IP and from transmedia. Here we had the movie launching in 2022, which had a strong impact on MAU, but even a larger impact just I think the remaster version on PC, just launching on a new platform here had a huge impact on the MAU, of course. But again, it's really cool to see this combo effect coming into play where there's just IPs are constantly available in new ways for the audiences. All right, jumping into the third section here, knowing more about the gamers here. So this is based on our product here that's very survey data across tons of different categories, and this is some of the cool insights we have for PC and console. From the top level here, we have 66% of all players last year for the played PC and or console in the past 6 months. I think interesting to note in the demographics side on the right, we don't see that much difference between the total player base, including mobile, versus the PC and console one, where I think there's still some stereotypes about the gender or age splits there. We see slightly more males here at 60% for PC and console. But we also see very similar on mobile. And in terms of age split as well, we see slightly less older from 40 plus gamers on the PC and console side, and a little bit more on the very youngest demographic, but not that big of a difference. So again, very widely adopted across most demographics here. What's also cool is we were able to have tons of different questions without our survey, and with multiple questions and variables in place, we're able to categorize across many different personas and groups of players. One simple way is just kind of breaking players down by if they are a core, mid-core, casual gamer. Again, this is across many different variables. But what's interesting to note, I think, is the percentages here. We have about 4 in 10 PC and console gamers are in our core gamers category, and you can see some really big differences in terms of playtime per week, double of casual gamers at 10 hours, but also percent that are payers. So we measure a lot of gamers, of course, or for example, in a family. That doesn't mean that they're purchasing game. They could be their parents purchasing. And that's why not everyone is a payer. But you see, of course, core gamers are going to have a much higher rate and a much higher spend amount versus casual gamers there at only 42%. But again, it just shows, I think, that everyone's playing, not everyone's spending. What's also interesting, I think the angle is, of course, we keep talking about engagement, but there's so many different ways to engage with PC gaming in general, especially in PC and console. Only less than 25%, so less than 1 out of 4 players are just playing. So 24% are just playing games, but we see 29% of players are playing and viewing content. And we see a whopping 43% are playing, viewing, and what we call other engagement. This could be anything that's not playing and viewing, from social media interaction to going to conferences, esports events, etc. So most of the players are actually, or nearly half the players are engaging in many different ways. And also interesting, only 4% are playing in what we call the other engagement. So pretty much playing and viewing is a prereq. And if they're doing that, there's a high chance that they could be engaging in other ways. But if they're not viewing, they're probably not going to be engaging in other ways. So kind of interesting to note. How does this break down with different generations? So this is all the percentage of players that have engaged with gaming content in all those different ways I just highlighted. Over 50% of Gen Alpha is doing that, near so for Gen Z and millennials, and you see a bigger drop off with Gen X and boomers. But I think, of course, there's obviously a big caveat to these where there's also different times in your life where you're going to have less free time, different expectations towards gaming. But again, I think it's still going to highlight that this is an integral part of the gaming culture. It's expanding now, how players interact. And I expect even when Gen Alpha and Gen Z get older, they're still going to reflect their different outlook on how gaming is and what it means to them. Socializing. So I think it's also interesting to note, of course, this has been a part of gaming for a long time, but it's only growing more than ever. And you can see this is the importance of self-reported importance of social features in games. For each one of these categories, over 60% of the people said this was important. From socializing with other players, competing, to cooperating towards a common goal. So we've seen this year over year. These numbers, of course, have always been high in gaming, but it's only growing over time. And we've seen that even deeper. We were looking into the quote unquote metaverse, which is a hot topic. But it's kind of interesting to look at this here, I think, where this is the breakdown of players that are actually involved. There's 55% of players are actually involved in some kind of getting together in game worlds while not playing the main gameplay. And there's 78% of players that reported that they're interested in socializing in game worlds beyond the gameplay again. So a lot of interest here already in terms of actual engagement, but it's only going to get bigger, or there's more interest for this to grow over time here. Yes, so in terms of cross-platform play, this is also a hot topic. I think with all the different platforms involved, how many players are actually involved with mobile versus console? As many developers start, PC and console developers develop for mobile developers are starting to jump into the PC and console space. We see only 14% are console only and only 14% for PC only a lot are 25%. So 1 out of 4 players are mobile and PC, 18% mobile and console. And actually 23% of players are actually playing across all 3 of these major platforms, which is pretty cool. All right, so yes, that was the overlook of the kind of 2022, and I think that informs us into the last little piece here. I wanted to talk a little bit more about the 2023, some of those key topics that we brought up. What I mentioned at the beginning, game delayed. We're actually really excited. We have a new product that we launched called our Game Health Tracker, and this is looking at a monthly cadence of the total purchase funnel of gaming here. And you can see all the key indicators from awareness to purchase intent. A ton of these games in this list right here, including Legend of Zelda, for example. These were all slated, I believe, originally for 2022. And a lot of them got delayed for many reasons, but definitely COVID impacted. So we're going to see, as you can see, this full list here, a very killer lineup of a lot of these key franchises in our industry here. From everything Zelda again to Diablo, it should be a huge year for 2023. What I also mentioned was the supply chain. So what we're looking at this year is that the semiconductors are going to be more available, more plentiful. And so what we're actually going to see is an increase in supply chain. So a lot of those newer generation consoles from Switch, which is the newest for Nintendo, but also PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series SX, we should see a large impact in units available, which will also translate into units sold here that will really. So again, from the software to the hardware side, we should have a really strong year in 2023. In terms of our forecast, this is looking beyond 2022. We're looking at 23 to 25 here. And we're seeing this is our expected player user engagement or player base growth over the next couple of years. PC, we expect to be more flat here, but we're seeing a big growth here across the console for the next couple of years. So overall, again, seeing a small decline this year or last year, but we're expecting trends to go way back up. Alrighty, so that is the presentation for now. Just to highlight again, we have so much more available within our different products, and all of our different services we offer. So if you want to know more about the games, the gamers, or just the overall market, definitely reach out to us. We're happy to help. And as I mentioned at the beginning, here is a QR code. This is our free PC and console gaming report that fueled a lot of this presentation today, and there's much, much more detail in there. So I really recommend checking it out.